strings, savior incites grief. Take us to find peace, delighted with light leads, enticed by the shine, bring. I got something in my eye. No, I'm not gonna do that. What you mean? This plan? No, I'm not gonna do that. I got something in my eye. I'm not gonna do that. What you mean? This plan for me? Not gonna do that. I got something.
Welcome and good evening. I'm Brown Girl Interrupting, also known as Maria, and I am so glad to have you here today with me on Pain to Power Leading with Love. And we have an amazing guest, Kenan Bishop, who is going to be joining us shortly. But before we bring him on the stage, I love it. Salute to all my Ranters family. I see Redemption Song 76 is in here. Salute, and thank you for pulling up, for being in the chat, for engaging. It's going to be a great show. And today I want to start off with a lot of times we are talking about pain, and I want to kind of shift us a little bit from the pain and the power to the leading, because leadership is something that is so complex sometimes. And lately, particularly this week, I've been reflecting on it. I have a 17-year-old son who just turned 17, but he's kind of this up and coming leader, and we've had these conversations of what does it mean to truly lead others. And it really is about relationships, but relationships foster in cultures. So I want to connect all of these pieces together and thinking about this quote that I have to give credit to my colleague, Dina Kune. And originally the statement was about schools, but truthfully, no spaces are culturally neutral, but rather they are constructed around sets of norms, values, and expected behaviors that are culturally bound. And so the idea is, as leaders, and when we're leading others, it's making the invisible visible and making the familiar a little strange in order to lead others with that love and relationship. And so today, I am so happy to introduce you to Kenan Bishop, who is a friend of mine, whom I met through the organization Unbound Ed in 2020. And he is an educator, an advocate, and an artist. And we are so lucky to have him here today. So welcome, Kenan.
Hey, what's going on, sis? Excited to be here. Shout out to all the Pain to Power, people in the family. What's up?
Thank you. Well, and shout out to all your folks who are here with us too. Hopefully they're joining us. So again, I am really grateful to have you on here. I know that we started off with a little bit of music, so I'm going to kind of bring us back there. Tell us about that piece with Self-Righteous. Tell us a little bit about the piece that we just listened to from your artist's creation.
Yeah, that joint, lot of fun. That joint, a lot of fun. So it's actually that one is called Move This Plank. And it's just the idea of moving a plank from your own eye before you say too much about other folks, right? So it's really a self-reflective piece. And especially, the past few years when it comes to politics and everything that was, going on in the political landscape, there's so many opportunities, right, to point the finger. But can we take a moment before pointing the finger and actually look and say, all right, let me move this plank out of my eye? And, as a person of faith, I think it's important to be able to recognize that I can't say anything about somebody else's speck until I deal with my speck.
I love that, because I think it goes back to everything we're talking about with the idea of leadership and leading others is knowing ourselves, right? Because that's certainly something that we don't all have.
For sure. Yeah. Being able to be self-aware is not it's not an immediate, it's not an immediate journey, right? It's one that takes quite a long time. And folks who can actually step in and say, hey, young man, hey, young woman, you might want to turn this a little bit differently than the way you're headed.
I love that. But that's not easy work. And we're going to get to that, because I definitely want to dig into how we do that work, because it's dynamic, it's complex, and I think there's a lot of layers to it, right? And we've talked about this before, and that's what we're going to kind of unpack. But before we do, I always want to know, as this is about pain to power, leading comes from experiences that take us there, right? So just for you, when you think about the idea of turning pain into power, what does that mean in your own eyes?
Yeah, I think the concept is huge, right? And pain and grief, period, isn't linear. So a lot of times it's how do we take the pain and continue to walk with it, but walk with it in a way that doesn't become unbearable. My wife and I have been together for quite a while, but we experienced some significant pain with our second child. And so our second child, Morgan, had a condition called spinal muscular atrophy. And so she, after about 4 months, started losing weight instead of gaining weight. We found out the condition that she had was actually a fatal condition. And so we were able to love on Morgan for about 2 years and treat her um, very well and use a lot of equipment to support her. There was a suction machine that would go down her nose that would remove, spit, saliva, everything else because she couldn't clear that mucus. She had a machine that would help shake her up so we could loosen up the mucus that was inside of her, and we would be able to do that. We revived her more times you want to shake a stick at, where she would be um, gray and bluish color, ashen, but it was her who really taught us, the importance of life and breath, and seeing her come back, so many times was fantastic. But she passed away, and she passed away at 2 years old. And so that pain,
I'm sorry for your loss.
yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate it. I enjoy talking about Morgan because it keeps her kind of spirit alive,
Mm-hmm.
and she's been a
Mm-hmm.
blessing to so many people. But Morgan, I think the pain of Morgan has also produced the power in our family. I remember still being a school principal, and being able to have more compassion for people. Um,
Mm.
After Morgan passed away, and dealing with what it takes to live with and love on a medically fragile child, and the pain hurts. You know what I mean? There's 2 days a year where I go Jack Bauer. It's like don't call, don't write. These are my days to just weep. Right, so I'll stay in bed longer and I'll just
Mm-hmm.
cry and I'll watch her video from her life and um, just process that, right? And then come back out to the world after those couple of days and love on folks and support people. But Morgan taught us the importance of breath. She taught us how to take advantage of like every moment, how important relationships are, and how to slow down and not rush through people, but actually love people through relationship, good, bad, and ugly. So I would say
Mm.
the pain doesn't go away, but the pain is just kind of it's held differently, and it turns into I think a daily inspiration to just try and love on folks right.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean, one, thank you for sharing. I think that vulnerability of sharing such a personal story of how it's impacted you, but how you've taken a painful experience, but found the power in it, the power to make it something you walk with care. And you've helped to then help others to see that too, which is powerful. It sounds like obviously then it's definitely transformed the way you're moving through the world. Um, and so I want to, can we go back a little bit? I want to go back
Yeah,
just a little bit more to who you are. So you shared your story of being a father, but before you were a father, you were yourself young, right?
yeah,
And and the work that you do is, I always feel when we're in education and we're talking about race and anti-racism, those experiences begin when we're much younger, through a
yeah.
lot of different lenses. So tell me a little bit about just your childhood, your upbringing, what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm an Ohio boy, born and raised in Cincinnati, and my mother and my grandmother were like integral, right? So my grandmother, I think, is where it all started. So she was, marching with Dr. King, Reverend Otis Moss, was big in Cincinnati back then. He's in Cleveland now, and Jesse Jackson, all these folks, like during the movement,
Mm.
when these folks were young. So my grandmother was one who said, "Look, as people of faith, we actually need to be involved in justice." When my mom was little, she tells me that she was one of the kids who was they did like a sit in at the local department store because they wouldn't support like black Santa Clauses, right?
Mm.
And all of this actually came out of the church that she was growing up from. So as we were coming up, we recognized that there wasn't a separation. It's like you can't be a person of faith and just sit back and watch injustice happen. Like you have to be actively engaged. And there were like marches that we would be involved in that were ceremonial, and then there were other things as we got older that were actually part of the movement. And it was in us. When I decided to go to school, I decided I was going to be, um, an educator. And
Mm.
I came out of school and decided I was going to live in the same neighborhood where I worked. Um, it was inner city. Taught for a few years, became an administrator, pretty soon, and recognized the work that needed to be done was justice work. Right, we've got to make sure the kids have the right experience at school, and there's no lack. Um, I was able to be in a high performing school that was one in very few, and a network that wasn't doing very well by kids. A lot of hardworking people, but just weren't seeing results. And so from there, I was able to join a network of high performance schools. And it seemed like what we were doing in isolation was now actually being done in an entire network. And so I had a lot of great experience and relationships there. And that eventually led to joining a public school district as a chief equity and achievement officer. And as
Mm.
you see, that young man moves with his hands a lot.
Mm.
As a chief equity and achievement officer, it was an opportunity to be a part of a cabinet that was positioned to turn around a district that had been failing. A lot of hardworking people, and you know, due to I don't think it was teachers and staff and principals and whatnot who weren't working hard, but they just hadn't been successful in terms of turning that corner. When it came to
Mhm.
student achievement, and so um, I served as a chief equity officer and was a part of a fantastic cabinet that worked really hard with some leaders that worked really hard and teachers who worked really hard and were able to really make some significant change and significant impact. And so the district was able to move from what had been considered a failing district for over 16 years to um, to being within the top 10% of growth within the state. We moved the gap closing component grade from an F to a B in a year. It was just a lot of good people doing a lot of
It's
good work.
powerful.
Yeah, and it felt really good, to to move kids and to move a city and to work alongside those folks who are really committed.
Mm. And I think that's transformational, right? To be a part of something like that. So what happened to that work? Did it get to continue, or were there changes involved in it?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely changes that were involved in it. After a couple of years, I think the reality was um, there were a lot of things that we said no to, and there were some really focused things that we said yes to. I think there were a lot of people who were pleased with it, but ultimately it was kind of our time to go. And so our team has since been doing other work outside of the district. All of us are still involved in equity work and defining what equity is inside of education, outside of education, and making sure that the coalition of the willing, I think the national coalition of the willing, is out there driving change. My work for the past few years has been as co-founder of Rethink, and so there's a team of us at Rethink who've been able to work in the education realm, nonprofit realm, as well as some corporate groups to
Mm.
help folks understand that when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we're really dealing with is belonging, right? So how do
Mm.
we ensure that the environment is right for transformation as opposed to like toxicity? Uh,
Mhm.
there's
Mhm.
there's a lot of conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we've got to be able to encounter one another and ensure there's a sense of belonging so that you can have those tough conversations about race and stay in relationship with one another.
Right. No, and so I think all of that is is very powerful in a different way of seeing some of this work. But I want to step back a little bit because I'm curious to know, as you moved into your new organization, right, where you center belonging, what are some of the things that you noticed or learned from working in the district that you were in, where you created all this transformation, but at the same time, as you said, you had to say no to some things and yes to some things, which maybe if you elevate that a little bit more, I think not everybody who's not in a school district, right, knows what that means sometimes in the implications of when we have to say no and why. and what we say yes to and why when it comes to equity work. So can you tell a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in the district, there were so many things that were lessons. I think clearly defining equity as ensuring that all students had like the appropriate work in front of them was huge. And then also, as a public district, there are a lot of folks who want to work with you. Um, it's a great opportunity for organizations to come in and support kids. And um, just because things are a good idea doesn't mean that they're the right idea.
Mm.
So what we had to do was really streamline. And so there were some partnerships that were good things, maybe good activities for kids, but they didn't center on making sure that we were focused on developing like standards understanding. And I don't want to get too deep into details because it'll sound like alphabet soup here. Uh, but I think the high level is if kids are given the right stuff and adults are taught how to give them the right stuff and they become confident in it and leaders are taught how to monitor the right stuff and we can remove excess things from their plate, then it allows everyone to focus on true north. And so our goal was to
Mm.
remove those excess things. It might be cool, but not focused on true north. And with that,
Mm.
um, I think some relationships also, you know, I think some adult relationships might have felt shaken, who have been around
Mm.
for a while. And it was like, nope, there's nothing wrong with you as a person. This just isn't the direction that we're heading, at this point. And things when relationships get shaken up, things can happen.
Right. And I mean, I think that's a great segue into again thinking about what you're doing now is beyond the schools, right? So you're working with organizations, you're working with corporations, you're working with nonprofits, like many different realms. And so it sounds like relationships, right, is the big key. So when you think about that, um, and you think about the importance of relationships, can you speak to the significance of understanding those in an authentic way when it comes to specific? Actually, you know what, I'm going to step back a little bit because I think what's really important, and we talked about this ourselves, is like we hear this work of equity, like the language is thrown out so much, right?
Right.
But actually understanding what we're talking about is so key. So diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI work is like the next big thing. It's like you can throw a stone and find somebody who's doing something with this business. So tell me a little bit more about just what makes your work um, different, one, than what we traditionally see as DEI itself, and what you kind of want to push towards that makes it more impactful than what you've seen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like you can throw a stone and hit somebody, and sometimes those folks you hit have had a bad experience with DEI, and it feels like a very blame heavy or shame heavy thing to address. And so you've got people of color who are like reactivating trauma. Like you want me to have conversations at mixed race groups about stuff that I usually only talk to my folks about at the coffee table. Woo, do you really want me to
Mm,
do that? And then what happens when I share myself? And then tomorrow I come in and my organization hasn't changed and they're still exercising the same foolishness, the same dominant narratives, right? The same biases, and it hasn't changed. Ugh, y'all are asking me to do that. And then with, like my white brothers and sisters, it's like, yo, there's so much shame, right? And
mhm,
they're dealing with, am I a bad white person? And they'll say things like, well, I just want to sit back and I don't want to say anything because I think I use my voice too much and I just want to sit back as a learner. Well, while that sounds good, that's not the space you need to, that's not the way you need to show up in mixed race conversations. You actually need to speak, right? You need to
mhm,
acknowledge kind of what you're going through and how you're processing things. And if we can do it, one of the things we've been, talking heavily about with every group is this idea that Kazu Haga has popularized called fierce vulnerability. Kazu Haga
mm,
studies Dr. King, right? So it's Kingian nonviolence, and he just does a great job of articulating certain ideas about what it takes to be in community. So what our differentiator is we truly believe in fierce vulnerability, and we begin breaking those parts down and modeling it, right? So
mhm,
we can actually share the pain. We can share the pain. We can no longer look at people of color as the folks who are responsible for holding the pain of race and racism and being the educators, the teachers of it, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has to carry some water. So,
Mm-hmm.
and where we challenge and support, white folks is we say, hey, we recognize that it may feel easier to turn this off. It's gonna start hurting at a certain point, but we want to support you sometimes through coaching, like one-on-one,
Mm-hmm.
community building, through certain protocols, all of these pieces, even affinity spaces, which we do very well,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can do your work separately, so that when we come together, we're able to work cohesively. We do affinity spaces for people of color, BIPOC folks as well. Let's do our work. And I like to refer to it when I'm working with my BIPOC folks as, when the porch lights come on, or when the street lights come on, right? Because when you're growing up
Mm.
and the street lights come on,
You gotta
you
go
know,
home.
it's time to go home.
Yeah.
Like that affinity space is like, it's time for us to come home, but it's time for us to have like real engaging and challenging conversations with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Not a blame space, but like a let's think and process space. So when we get back together in mixed groups, we can actually have good conversation.
Yeah. And I think that that's just it, right? Like the conversation is what gets us towards that action piece, is we have to talk about race to actually do anything about race, right? Like to change and transform our spaces. But in that, like I'm really curious because we keep talking about space and we keep talking about the relationships, and you mentioned the idea of like giving grace, right? One of the giving grace to people of color to not hold the burden and the pain, and to create that safe and brave space, right? But then for white people to not feel the guilt and shame, but we often miss how to create that space, right? So it's not just about walking in and sharing knowledge, it's the conditions. Can you talk a little bit more about what conditions you think and you've seen that like really allow for people to bring that vulnerability, to be ready and willing to engage and not disengage?
I think there's two things. I want to clarify this idea of shame, and then I want to talk about the right to be raggedy. So it's not that white people shouldn't feel shame. It's that shame should not define your interaction.
Mm.
Okay. So you're going to feel some of it, but you don't have to live there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to worry. Am I a good person? Good person? Am I a bad person? This is the water. So shout out to the Racial Equity Institute. And this whole idea of the groundwater approach for dealing with systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
But we recognize that from their example, if you see one fish that's dead on top of a pond, you go ahead and examine that fish. But if the entire lake, right, has fish that are turned up, it's an issue. But if you look at all of the water surrounding, right, even beyond that lake, there's different streams and bodies of water, and the fish are dead, then there's an issue with the groundwater. You got to get in there and change the water. So we recognize that Black folks, white folks, everybody are dealing with the water of racism. And there are things that are invisible, like you mentioned when we came on, that you have to make visible. So I would say it's not that we don't want folks to feel shame. We don't want folks to live in shame. Like there will be times where you feel it, right? We're not gonna say, hey, people of color, you have to reactivate some trauma, and it's like we don't want you. It was like, nope, everybody's gonna feel a little bit of something, but we don't have to kick each other off the island when we feel it.
Mm.
This other idea, Maria, to your question of like, what are the conditions? I think it varies from organization to organization. There's going to be certain needs that that your organization is going to have that this organization over here isn't going to have.
Mm-hmm.
One that I would say is universal is this idea of having the right to be raggedy. So one of the traits of what we refer to as white supremacy culture is like perfectionism, right? And perfectionism can sound like a glorified trait. Like, are we just saying that white people are perfect? That's not what we're saying. We're saying that there's this desire to like go off in the corner by yourself, dot every I, cross every T, have your package ready to present, and then show up, right? It's very performative. When we deal with the right to be raggedy, we're saying that there's some genius in your processing. So we can be in dialogue, right? And I may not have this thing fully formulated, I's dotted, T's crossed, but I can tell you what's going on as I'm thinking through it, as I'm working kind of through my soul and saying, all right, this is what I'm trying to formulate, and this is the direction that I'm headed. Still upholding excellence, but giving other people permission to kind of be a work in progress and think with me. So we call it thought partnership, right? But if we create spaces where folks can show up with the right to be raggedy, we're all committed to thinking through this thing together. Hopes us not be so bound to perfectionism where we can't do anything but perform. So you and I are friends, right? If I show up to you as the representative of Kenan Bishop, then I'm going to be dressed to the nines, right? I'm going to make sure that all you hear about is the highlight reel. Maria, these are all the accomplishments I've done. These are all the decisions that I made that were perfect. This is how my team changed the world. I am, right, I'm performing for you.
Right.
But if I can come to you as a friend and I can be like, listen, we got to do this and we got to do that. I ain't quite sure. This is my idea. I'm thinking through it. This is the direction I want to go, right? And it can be a little bit raggy, but you know me and I don't have to perform, girl. We can get to some genius.
Right.
Something that's beautiful because I'm no longer putting up this facade. We don't have to be the ones, wearing a mask. So that's what we, encourage. And so one of the norms or one of the conditions that would be necessary is that folks would have to have enough relationship where they can exercise their raggedy. But how easy is it for a person of color, right, in an organization where your superiors are looking at you, dealing with the bias of Black people are lazy, Black people aren't intelligent, do they have the intellectual capacity? We're taught that we have to go into the corner, figure it out, bring it back perfectly, present it like, here, boss, is this a good? Right? And we can't even show up right. So understand just that one condition, it takes a lot of work to get folks to the place where they can have that level of honesty and vulnerability. So easier said than done.
I love that. And I think that the way that you just outlined that, like, that's powerful because that is the importance, right? It's that the right to be raggedy. I love that. And I see a lot of people in the chat also commented on it. And in that we have to have a space that allows that though, right? And the double consciousness of people of color who are also having to have the pressure of showing up a certain way doesn't allow for that all the time. So relationships are key, right? I mean, that's huge, but oftentimes that's also where there isn't that authenticity, right? So like you and I, we have that relationship, right? So I can come and I can feel comfortable enough not knowing everything because it's okay not to know, but you have to establish that. And I think I would imagine that piece, as you're saying, right? Like that's not an easy thing. And it's important to say that, like, and I'm outlining it because I think a lot of times people think, well, I just have this language. Now I can go and I can talk about race with people and it's going to all go fine. Right. Like, and it's so much more about the relationships that allow for the real digging in and messy conversations, because it's going to be triggering, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be uncomfortable, and leaning into that, but also creating that space for relationships, it seems like is going to be key for that. So thinking about that, we're actually going to take a real quick break and then we're going to come back, but I want to know more about some of the work and what you've learned from some of those challenging experiences in a few moments. But right now, as I told you earlier, I am a blogger, I'm a writer. We're going to learn a little bit about my blog and where it came from and what inspired me to start thinking about my journey of pain to power. Hi, my name is Maria, but you are soon going to know me as Brown Girl Interrupting. And what I mean by that is that very soon, hopefully, you're going to be following my blog. I am a writer, and I started writing because I was married, I had children, and then my life changed when I separated, and I did a lot of learning and reflecting and growing in that process of change, because change always leads us to that. And I've decided to share that with the rest of the world, because sometimes hearing that someone else is going through the same thing as you, or understanding and putting words to the feelings and experiences we're having, helps us to heal from them, or grow from them, or learn from them. And so that's what my blog is. It's writing about life, healing, relationships, parenting, dating, marriage, pain, love, mistakes, growth, and coming out whole still in all of it as a human, flawed, but always open to new things. So that's my life, that's my journey, and it's written in this blog. But my hope is that you are going to go to www.browngirlinterrupting.com and join and subscribe to the blog and read all about my story to help you maybe gain some perspective on yours. All right, thank you so much. And yes, please go up there to the website, www.browngirlinterrupting.com. Put your email in, subscribe, and you'll get the recent posts. You'll also be able to see all my different connections on social media, all my updates on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of it. I recently, well, it's been a minute, but I wrote some posts. There's some new ones coming soon, but Shattered and You Might Win Some are recent ones that came out, and definitely go and read them. Please comment, share, like, all of the above. And so coming back to you, Kenan, and definitely go check out the blog if you haven't yet. So I actually, it came about just a little bit after I met you. Oh, welcome to Whiskey Girl. Whiskey Girl was one of my my audience and my guests as a poet and a prolific, amazingly fire woman. I love having her here. Thank you so much, Whiskey Girl. And thank you to all the Ranters fam for showing up and being in the chat. So tell me, so we talked about kind of this breakdown of when we're talking about, and V Smiles, welcome, V Smiles TV, salute. Our Ranters Network is here and supporting. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everybody showing up and pulling up and definitely engaging with us in the chat. So in terms of this work, right, what is it that you feel you are doing that is transformative in making change? So there's one thing to have conversations, but if those conversations don't lead to actionable change, right, it's just conversation. So what is it that you have seen has been impactful in leading to those actions and those change in these organizations?
Yeah, I think there's a cautionary tale, and I think there's truth to what you mentioned when it comes to conversation. So when we started off, I said, my wife and I, we had a loss, right? Mm-hmm. Talked about my story with my daughter. But the beauty in the journey with our daughter was the conversations we kept having. Mm-hmm. Right. So it was like the conversations in the hospital where it was like, I don't know how we're going to get through this. And it was the conversations in the car, like, all right, we're going to get through this. And there were the conversations where it was like, man, this is really hard. And the weeping was happening. Right. And then I might be strong on a day when she was weak, and she might be strong on a day when I was weak. So the conversation is a transformation. And when we think about the engagements that happen with organizations, there is no Southwest Airlines case study to say, do these 10 things and you will be anti-racist. A lot of times what happens is you'll have gung-ho groups of folks who will, we actually heard a story about a group of folks, about 10 young people. They went into a room, they met for about an hour, and they came out and they were like, we are going to be anti-racist and we want to change these things right now. And the energy was right, but the issue is that the organization did not become the organization operating off of those cultural norms overnight. nor did the nation.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the water. So the first thing that we have to do is see each other. You see each other, not by walking past each other. You see each other in real conversations where you're fiercely vulnerable. So if, Maria, I were to break down for you a different portion of my story, you were to break down a different portion of your story. What you're doing here is you're being fiercely vulnerable when you share your loss, you share the pain, right? And you've got these other folks come on and share the pain that leads to power. Is you're creating a community. So the first thing that we've got to do is create the container. But we believe in, there's like 4 ideas. You've got to be able to leverage your own journey in order to help other folks. Okay. So we help folks get good at tapping into what is my journey so they can use that when they're actually leading other people further on this road of anti-racism. We deal with kind of having some foundational knowledge. So you only know what you're exposed to, right? So we've got to be able to get into some history that may not have been shared. We've got to be able to look at some of the impacts that you don't have conversations about. Now, I know, interestingly enough, getting a lot of attention on social media this past month was Tom Hanks' revelation about Black Wall Street, and because he's Tom Hanks, you know what I'm saying? Shout out to Tom Hanks, and he's got some level of consciousness now. He's like, yo, what's the problem? Why am I just now learning about this? And that's been folks' story for quite a while. Like when you hear about Black Wall Street, what do you mean? What? Yeah. There was what? Tulsa? Who? What? Right? And so all of these things that have to challenge these beliefs of Black and brown intellectual inferiority. Right? We've got to have some foundational teachings about, hey, there's nothing wrong with Black people. Like that, right? That's a lesson. Like there's nothing wrong with Black people.
Right.
Like we say we want to believe that, but no. I mean, please, I tried to fix Black people most of my life because I love Black people. And I would look outside my window and be like, oh, my people. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? I studied Pan-African studies in college, and I still was trying to save my people as opposed to recognizing the beauty that is my people. But I would say that there are multiple things that happen in conversation, but you got to go to foundational knowledge. You got to leverage yourself and leverage your own identity. You got to learn how to gauge a group, right? You have to be aware of yourself and aware of the group. That's right. Come on, Whiskey. There's nothing with Black people except thinking that there's something wrong with Black people. That's the only thing.
Right.
So ultimately, as we move, what leads to transformation is folks being fiercely vulnerable, folks having foundational knowledge, right? And then folks learning certain protocols and tools. So one of the things that we share is like, how do you have conflict the right way? So you can be really conflict avoidant, right? And think that I'm the ideal employee because I'm conflict avoidant, right?
And that's another white supremacy culture tenet, though, right? Is the avoidance of conflict, right?
That's a tenet, right? And so we've got to teach people how to actually engage in conflict in the right way so that it actually generates outcomes that are of benefit. So there's a series of protocols, consultancies that we will take folks through, right, to help your communication with one another not stall out. Why do people of color oftentimes find out that there's a problem with their performance at contract renewal time, but nobody has a direct conversation with you? Because we're dealing with these doggone fears and biases and racism, right, that is just in the water. Like, I'm afraid to talk directly to a Black person. I am afraid that they're going to be aggressive with me if I have this conversation with a person of color. So what I'm going to do is I'm not ever going to have a direct conversation about something small that can be tweaked if I just tell them, right? And I'm going to have this trumped up evaluation, and then you're going to find out at the end of the year, hey, we're moving in another direction, or you're not doing really well, right? And it does. You feel gaslit. And that is a manifestation of racism, because if you love me, you would tell me immediately when there's a problem. if I'm walking around and I got something green in my teeth and you let me walk away, I don't know that we not friends until I get to the house and look in the mirror.
Right, and then I'm gonna question our friendship because like you let me do that. Like, why would you let me show up like that, right?
And there's so many things. Like, what is the assumption? Is the assumption that I'm not smart enough to fix it? Is the assumption that I'm too much like an animal to to not go off on you? Like, what is it? What's going on in your mind to suggest to you that you can't talk to me respectfully about something that might need to be tweaked?
And I would wonder how much of it is your own fear of discomfort, right? Because that right to comfort idea, which is also right a tenet of white supremacy culture, is the idea that I don't do uncomfortable, right? Perfection is I don't do uncomfortable. I don't put myself in positions where I don't feel that I am in control. And so, in an opportunity like that, I would imagine what you're asking people to do is go outside of those things, which is necessary, and also examine their bias in the process too, right? A lot of what you pulled up, I think, like comes back to those unconscious things. The groundwater is not is the making the invisible visible, because it's like we don't know what's in the water, we don't see it, but we can see the impact of it. We can see all the dead fish, even if we can't see the actual things that are killing the fish. And so it is about seeing those things.
100%. You know, and I think the reality is, like, culturally right now, somebody could look at me and be like, "Oh, that brother's aggressive," right? But hip hop would tell you right now, I'm just a hype man, right? I'm just a hype man, right?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
Flavor Flav. I got Chuck D over here just spitting the truth and all. I got my clock and I'm just like, yo, everybody, you need to look, check him out, right? But you afraid of Flavor Flav. You don't need to be afraid, bro. I'm just a hype man, right? And so the reality is, until we can actually accept, right, the different ways that we show up and not look at it believing the same foolishness, right, that we've been taught over and over again and has been in the water, like, hey, black people are dangerous. You know, people of color are aggressive. Hey, you know, they're too much like animals, right? So it's like, I can't even be the hype man without you getting afraid. I'm just being the hype man, though. So we got to be able to recognize that there's differences, there's different ways of showing up, there's different ways of being, and I don't want anyone to have to put on something that doesn't fit them, right? I remember my grandmother telling me about David, when David had to, you know what I'm saying, he had to put on like Saul's armor and he had to shake it off like, yeah, this don't fit. But we're asking people of color to do it all the time. How are we gonna knock out Goliath if I gotta wear something that don't fit? Just let me get my slingshot, dog. Here's my slingshot. And I'm gonna go and handle the business. At the end of the day, there's only one Kenan Bishop. And if I can show up fully Kenan Bishop, I can do some damage. I mean, yo, we got some innovative things that we can do. Let me contribute to this team. Let me use all of my vernacular, all of my intellect, right? Let me quote the Queen's English. Let me get into some educational pedagogy. Let me refer to Chuck D. Let me talk about Flavor Flav. Let me mix in a little bit of Pete Rock and CL Smooth. And then let me actually be Pentecostal preacher. Throw all that in a gumbo pot. We gonna get to something that you need. Innovation and research, boom, is gonna bless your whole life. But you trying to have me put on the wrong armor. All I need is my slingshot. Let me show my slingshot and we're gonna take care of this. What we need to make how much? Okay, wait a minute. All right. This is the amount of revenue that we need. This is the challenge. Here, I got a slingshot, but don't give me that old stuff. I don't need that. Right? Let me bring in me. Right? Oh, wait a minute. This is my homie over here. Here's homegirl over here. Let's bring in their voices too. Yeah, we all have slingshots and let's knock this thing out. But it doesn't happen when we look at what's normative. We look at what's white as normative, right? And I ain't mad at white people. I love them. We ain't even trying to kick white people away from the table.
And that normative doesn't just show up for white people, let's be clear. It's people of color, right? Color doesn't equal consciousness, let's be honest, right? We know a lot of folks.
I'm the main brother walking in white supremacy. I'm him. On my best days, I'm blackity black and it's all good, right? On my worst days, I'm hitting every single one of them white dominant culture. Please. I misapply urgency all the time. All the time. I mean, like if if stuff ain't going well, you know how much control I'm about to put my finger on stuff and make sure it's one right way. So we're all guilty of it. And I think that repentance is what gives other people the opportunity to show up and repent. Like, yo, we're a work in progress. The challenge that most folks have right now with DEI is it feels like people sitting across the table from each other saying, you. It doesn't matter what side of the table, right? But the reality is, like, maybe this meant that King Arthur had something. Maybe there was some wisdom in reshaping that table so that it was a circle. You know, we're not trying to get rid of white ways of being. All we're trying to do is ensure that it's no longer the default way of being. That all of these different ways of being can be respected. And once again, if I sound angry, I'm just Flavor Flav, y'all. I'm just a hype man. Don't be scared.
But I love the hype. I love the hype, and that's so true. And I would say, and I want to get to Jaz's comment, but I think this all comes back to this idea of culture not being neutral, right? So what you just elevated is all of those pieces of the lack of neutrality. So when we examine our culture, when we see it for what it is, in all the nuances, but the invisibleness too, right? And how we believe that it makes sense, even if it doesn't make sense for all. We follow it like it's the norm. It is what it is, right? Thank you so much. I love it. I see it. So Jai, you had a comment too, and I see V Smile says, how did he find his way into the DEI industry, and what's your wildest story teaching anti-racism to an organization?
So the wildest story, I don't know that it's wild as much as it's, once again, I use this term, it's a cautionary tale. Okay. It is possible to make so much progress so quickly that it feels like a fantasy. So we'll come into an organization, first couple of sessions, wow, no one has ever said these things to us. And the white people are talking and the black people are talking. And, it's like, wow, we feel like we're going to, like, knock the cover off the ball because we're now engaging in these conversations. And then you start making like forward progress. Boom, boom, boom. And this, and then regression happens. Something happens. And it causes regression. So I want to tell you, and this is kind of like a rap song, right? Like, these rappers ain't really talking about stuff they lived. It's a composite of a bunch of people, right? But then they say this is me, and I'm shooting up these people, and I'm taking that ain't really what happened. It's a composite. So this is not one particular. This is kind of a composite of multiple wild things,
right?
But let's talk about this idea of regression. So let's imagine that you're seeing Black folks, white folks, and everybody making forward progress. But then something happens to cause an individual in power to regress. And so now everything that they have stood for, okay? So, yep, we're going to be an anti-racist organization. Yes, we're going to make sure we're having these type of conversations. Yes, we're going to make sure that we're challenging these dominant narratives and these supremacist ideas. And then, because they feel unsafe, because they feel challenged, because life just ain't go right, because of racial fatigue, whatever it is, they start demonstrating the same behaviors that they've spoken out against. They become the model of white supremacist culture. They become the model of misapplied urgency. They become the model of one right way. They become the model of shame and blame. Like all of this, they become the model of shame and blame. Trying to trudge forward that way, that's hard. And so what has to be true is that anybody who's doing this work, so I encourage anybody who's working in DEI spaces to still be direct with your folks, because what I'm dealing with is basically a preach, right? You're now espousing something that you're not walking out, and you got to be willing to determine when the relationship is at a point where you need to part ways, okay? Because you can't force change on anybody. Now you can remain friends and you can be available if they need you later, but you got to be willing um, to kind of read the signs and know when it's time
Mm-hmm.
to part ways,
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to be damaging to try and force something forward. So I say all that to say I'm not giving
And
you a
it's not done with authenticity for sure, right? It's not real.
um I wouldn't say it's not real. I would say it is not realized in that moment in time, right?
Mm.
I would not say that folks who have started this journey that I've had the pleasure of working with were not sincere at some moment in time. I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that they got to a place where it was too much to handle. And because it was too much to handle, they opted out. Okay.
Mm.
Um, and so this is community work and this is soul work. As soon as you try to do this individually, apart from community, it's going to be near impossible. Okay.
Yeah.
American rugged individualism is a great story.
Mm.
It ain't true and it's
Right.
harmful.
It isn't
Right.
true, right? Nobody did it on their own. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So there was a question about like, how did I get into the work?
Yeah.
Um, so y'all know by now, I'm going to be my full self. Okay.
That's a
So
come with it all,
So that
please.
means that means hip hop, that means education, that means preacher. Um, there's probably a few other elements in there. Probably mama's boy, grandmama's boy, any of these things, right? So let me say, shout out to my pastor, because years ago he said something that stuck with me. He said, you know, when we ordain people, we're not ordaining people to do something. He said, what we're doing is we're recognizing what's always been present, and we're just catching up to what God has been doing. And the same thing with DEI work is like the title DEI got slapped onto it in
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement of work that had been going on, I think, in my life for 20 years. So in terms of the industry, uh, let me talk about partnership. So you see it says co-founder. So I didn't go out striking to do this on my own, based upon relationship and communication. A good friend said, hey, there's some work that needs to be done. I've been asked to do this work and I want you to do it with me. Are you interested? And we had a conversation. I said, yeah. And we started doing work together. And because of her relationships, there were doors that she was able to open that I wasn't able to open
Mm-hmm.
on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say anybody who's out here like trying to do this on your own, I refer to the Wu-Tang Clan a lot. So I would say it's better to be a part of Wu-Tang Clan than to be a solo artist.
Mm.
If you can be a part of the Wu-Tang and you can still be a formidable MC on your own, but you can get into the clan, you know, Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to with. So sometimes you need to get your clan together and use that opportunity to
Mm.
talk to people. Um, use platforms like this, you know, Maria, just to say, hey, there's some good people out there doing good work. You need to hear this crazy guy. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and just go out there and do it. The reality is, in the same way, there's a vacuum, um, maybe a void of like leaders. There's going to always be a
Mm.
good spot for a good leader. It may not be in the city that you live in. It may be a few blocks over. It may be a few states over. It might be virtual, whatever. I think there's always work for folks who are bringing something necessary to the planet. And
Mm.
so we're bringing something that's necessary to the planet because we recognize that you can't have diversity, equity, and inclusion without having healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so our intersection is healing. So we've got to show up in a way that helps folks heal, helps folks transform, and still benefits the planet.
Mm.
That's what we're trying to do.
And I think that is the most beautiful thing. And I will say, and I told you this, right? Like for me, that was what stood out. That was what stood out right away in your work, is that you combine the conversations on racism, anti-racism, equity, and healing. Because oftentimes we miss that piece. We miss the humanity piece of the need for healing. One, and then I think you brought it up, right, is that it's not a one-time healing. Like, you heal constantly. You heal and you repair, and then you hurt and then you heal, and then you hurt and you heal. And it's this constant cycle of re-examination to get to those difficult conversations. But that's a beautiful thing. And again, a lot of why, I definitely asked you here. I know we got a lot of people in the chat, and I want to honor some of this energy in the chat for sure. Whiskey Girl says yes, thank you so much. And Mr. Minjahel says the framework of reality is being destroyed for those just coming to the realization of inequality. And that is, it's a complex thing, right? And I think this goes back to what Kenan said in the idea of socialization, is that we are inundated in things that we may not even see. So there are people who don't see what is their reality as not being everyone's reality.
Well, we are also, that's shout out to James Hill. That brother is deep. That is a friend. James, glad you're in the spot. So this is a time where we are like cutting off our nose to spite our face. Mm-hmm. Like the reality is, like we're like cursing the water. Like we're poisoning the water. My partner Gina Breelove said this the other day, just so we don't have to share it. I mean, think about the laws that are being passed, right?
Right.
Think about how fear is just being stoked, right? It reminds me, once again, shout out to grandmother. My grandmother telling me about one of the kings, like in the book of Kings Chronicles, who was like, he was told by God, like, yo, you did this thing, and because of it, your kids are going to be harmed. And he was like, sweet, that means I'm good. I said, my goodness, what's going on? But that's where we're living right now. It's
wow. It's all for one.
As long as I'm good, as long as this generation is solid, right? The ruling class currently is okay. Don't matter what we doing to the kids, right? It doesn't matter what we pass. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter. I'm cool. We are steadily destroying our water. We're cutting off our nose to spite our face. I mean, and the reality is there's still a coalition of the willing. There is a group of folks who are out there that truly want what's best for this generation and the generations to come. And truly want us to be a culture that understands belonging and a sense of belonging and no longer wants to dominate, right? Mm-hmm. I just came from the Freedom Center in Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Great place to visit. Go ahead and visit if you haven't been there. But it's an Underground Railroad kind of museum. And on the first floor, you can take this this test to like gauge your internal biases. And so, the whole premise behind it, and it takes maybe 5 minutes. The whole premise behind it is like word association. Okay? If we associate certain words with goodness, you can click on those quickly. Certain words with badness, you can click on those quickly. They use cards. They're like, if I tell you I want you to put all the clubs and spades together and all of the hearts and diamonds together, you can do that really quickly. But if I tell you I want you to put the clubs and the hearts together and I want you to put the spades and the diamonds together, it actually takes longer to do it because it doesn't feel like there's a natural match, right? So when you're doing things that don't have a natural match, it causes you to operate slower. And we recognize that Blackness has typically been associated with like negativity, negative words, negative perceptions, whiteness, goodness, etc. Right? If we've seen X, read the autobiography of Malcolm X, like we understand that whole process. But this assessment really gauges how long it takes you to do this cross association to see if there's a bias that you may have toward one or the other. Well, my 17-year-old, she took the little assessment, and it was like, no, you good. Right? It was like, you're pretty clear. You're pretty clear. Like it's the same for you. Right? And I'm like, there's a generation of folks who are coming up who want to be at that place. Right? And it's not because they want to be colorblind. It's because they're color cognizant. Right? It's like, this is a color cognizant generation, and recognize that difference is valuable.
And what a big difference from the color evasiveness we've been like stuck in for so
Yes.
long, right? That we don't talk about it and we don't recognize the value of it. That is powerful. Wow. So within this and in all this work, and thank you so much, like Kenan, I think you've broken down so many layers to this work, and I think the power again of what Rethink is doing. Because I mean, honestly, I'm like, where do I sign up? To, like, like you
Yeah.
need some more folks, like virtual, I could do it. But but for sure, right? Like, I think that it's this is not easy work, right? This is not easy work. This is not easy, and it's similar to the work. I'm in the same field, different way of doing it. Because I'm in a district, but we align in a lot of our belief systems and the importance of humanity and the relationships, the belongingness, and all those pieces. But it takes a toll. It takes a toll emotionally. There are moments. I mean, I've certainly had crying many times. I think the last meeting I was in, I was like, look, I'm sorry that, I didn't prep you, but it's going to be an emotional space, right? Like this, and that comes with some beauty in that too, though, right? But what I want to know is for you personally, like
Yeah.
just for you personally, what is it that you have that helps you to be able to do this work without the burnout? Because what we know very much so is that this work leads to a lot of burnout. It leads to a lot of emotional exhaustion, and particularly for people of color leading it, right? So what is it that has given you that grounding, or gives you that grounding at the moments when it feels heavy or when it feels difficult, that keeps you moving through?
Yeah. Rituals, community, and history. So rituals, there are certain practices that are absolutely necessary for folks who are holding this space. Our partner, Gina Breedlove, is a holder of holders, which means she really helps us, right? In the, yeah, that's right, color cognitive
Color
generation.
cognitive
This is
generation. I
the
love
part.
it. Thank you, David Hardy.
So we've got a partner who, I mean, she's legit like a medicine woman and a sound healer who will hold us and help us process and
Mm.
navigate, and it's absolutely amazing. And she's helped articulate what rituals do I already have, and she's added some rituals to my practice that's a benefit.
Mm.
I didn't realize that one of the rituals that is necessary for me that I was already doing is walking with my son. He's 9 years old, and we'll
Mhm.
walk and we'll talk like adults, right? We'll talk about everything from how the day is going and how school was to how finances work, right? At 9 years old, uh,
Mhm.
having a conversation with my daughter, playing with her, walking. I'll usually take like a walk with each of them individually, but those things are beneficial. I do Twilight Walks, which means so there's this idea that like the fourth watch is a time where like God is like interacting and he's like walking the earth, right? It's an ancient idea.
Mm.
So I'll usually be up and I'll be walking and praying um, earlier than most. I won't tell you what time it is. It's earlier than most, right? It's
Okay.
during the fourth watch. Those pieces, certain baths are actually necessary and vital to help. And Gina has introduced like different things that I can put into my bath that help. So, and then having safe folks to like talk to and process with. I mean, absolutely necessary, vital.
Mm.
So I would say
Mm.
that's the part in terms of rituals, the relationships. So I mentioned my daughter, mentioned my son, my wife for sure. I have a close kind of group of folks who I talk to about stuff.
Mm.
Shout out, a couple of them are on here making comments, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
let me talk to you about a real challenging thing, uh,
Mhm.
and we can just process. So I think relationships are vital. My partner Jonesy, you'll see if you listen to some music. A lot of the stuff I produce, but there's some stuff that he has produced is really great. When I was a principal, I went to his house one time and I said, Jonesy, I need you to make me an angry track. I said, just make me I was like, just all these angry sounds. And he did. And I drove away and I was just like freestyling. That was like the way that I would process.
Mm.
Jonesy made me an angry track and I could just go off on that so I don't go off on people. I'm just a hype man, y'all. Don't be just flavor flavor. So, and in history, right? I think there's a beauty in knowing your history. So I started off talking about my grandmother. I tap into my grandmother regularly. When she passed away, my good friend Dr. Cortez Moss told me sometimes we're very important people like that pass away, significant people, they kind of like pass a mantle to us. And it's like we're wearing them, we're wearing their presence like on us. And so I tap into my grandmother's mantle a lot of times because of the history and because of the strength and because of what I saw her kind of endure and the way she could have conversations with me. There was one time I was really stressed out and I looked at my wife and I said, I need my granny. Like I said this, I mean, I'm a grown man. I said, I need my granny. She stood on a step stool because she's a little woman. And she opened her arms. This is my wife. Now she's 5 foot on a good day, right? 5 foot on a good day. And so she gets on the step stool and then she just embraced me and I put my head on her chest as if she was my grandmother and I wept. And after about 5 minutes, I felt better. So I think there's an element of like humanity that we have to recognize when we're doing this work. We can't go out, once again, shout out to Granny, I can't go out and preach to somebody else and I ain't living the stuff myself, right? So I can't tell you to be human and embrace somebody's humanity. And I don't even embrace when I need to weep. Yo, this was a hard couple weeks. I had to invoke my, look, I had to tell somebody my daughter's story, a piece of the story that's longer, harder to deal with. Woo. And then I had to do this and I had to do this. And now I had to deal with somebody who's in regression. And I still have to show love over here. And I need my granny. I need granny today. And my wife let me weep on her chest. It was absolutely necessary. So what keeps me? Those 3 things: rituals, relationships, and history.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for joining us tonight. Like, honestly, like, you've broken down so many amazing ways of just thinking and I think rethinking some of the ways that we even experience these conversations or that we show up for them, and just the work itself. So I really am so appreciative of you, Kenan. If anybody wants to learn more about Rethink, if they have organizations, I know a lot of our Ranchers Network are business owners. They are probably leading others and might be interested. Where do they go? What's the next step to direct them to learn more?
Yeah, I would say 2 things. First, rethink.us. Directly, you can connect us there. If you're following on Instagram right now, just DM me on Instagram, right? It's just Kenan Bishop on Instagram, and I would love to have a conversation with you. At the end of the day, it comes down to what's keeping you up at night. David Hardy is the one who taught me that term. What's keeping you up at night? Because you can be doing amazing work, but there's something that is making you restless, and if we can connect around that, we can help you think through how to operate with your team strategically so that belonging becomes real and DEI doesn't become a checklist. It becomes something that actually transforms.
Thank you. Not a checklist, right? That's for sure, right? It's transformative and it's important and it's necessary. So thank you for elevating the depth of it, the importance of it, and just all the layers. So I really appreciate your time today, Kenan. I've always, right, mad respect for you, my brother, for sure, always. And I'm honored to have had you here today. I know that the chat, thank you so much for all of your people for showing up in the chat. I didn't get to catch everyone's names, but I really appreciate you all showing up. Thank you to the Ranchers Network. I have to say thank you always to my amazing producer, Jal Logic, who is the man with the plan, who is always breaking out the videos and the connections and the great conversations and questions. So appreciative of him. And for those of you tuning into the rebroadcast, hopefully you enjoy. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, Brown Girl Interrupting, subscribe to the iRant Network, and subscribe to Better Minds Interrupting, as well as make sure that you are hitting that little bell for the notifications for all the upcoming shows. The next show coming up is not next week, but it is going to be on the 21st on Sunday, August 21st, I am going to have the author, Casey Gaines, and also another iRant network, or part of the network, and Ranters Union, Fave, and he is going to come and talk about his book as well as Pain to Power and how he is leading with love through his work. So please tune in on August 28th at 9 p.m. on Brown Girl Interrupting. Make sure you go to my website, you subscribe, think, and join us here again. Thank you so much, Kenan. Truly appreciate you.
Bless you. Pleasure. Shout out to Ja. He's doing his thing.
He's always doing this. My world has slowly crumbled around me countless times, and every time I rebuild with the pieces I've been given to birth something so transformational and beautiful that no one else knew might exist before it was shown to them. These moments tend to coincide within my romantic path. The universe has been telling me to focus on the revolution and not romance. It has over time given me the tools, resilience, and light to turn my pain into power. And only now do I see that the key to this always resided in the love and knowing I had in myself, not from the external sources of family or men. The message I have been avoiding might be that my time in this world I had existed in was not to receive love, but to put it out there for others to see, feel, and heal through. Revolution before romance moves pain into power.
Come on. Yes, Lord. Oh, redeemed soul on this track again. I don't understand. Yes. You a bad boy. That's how we do it. Nah, I don't do that, fam. That was me, so righteous. Copping to it, had to piece this flights just getting off the ground, barely seeing the lights flick. Share my views, excuse reckless slights. Kids say the darndest things. Me, I called it honest. Pay the garnish fee, sure check what I've been offered. But stayed as far as the pulpit, and then I walked it straight and tall. Off the call, laying hands, he hawing. Geppetto in my conscience, know that my tail was showing. Falsetto at my tonsil, showed that my stretch was growing. You meddle in my heart, the resort, the records played. Skipping over grace, cause it's mess to wipe away. Nah, I don't do it, fam. I was so judgmental. Saw who I was staring in the dirty window. Took a while to grasp, but hope to now see people through a new pain, blood-stained and unequal. Trying to write the music that others get inspired to. Rising the highs from viewing brothers with a quiet truth. Iron whose ride does do what it is required to. Driving through Fallujah from an insider view. Nah, I don't do it, fam. I was so judgmental. Saw who I was staring in the dirty window. Took a while to grasp, but hope to now see people through a new pain, blood-stained and unequal. Nah, I don't do it, fam. I was so judgmental. Saw who I was staring in a dirty window. Took a while to grasp, but hope to now see people through a new pain, blood-stained and unequal. Don't do it, fam.
In these shoes, walk in these shoes.